Parshas Tazrio Mitzora. So this week's Parsha introduces the notion of Mitzora. We've talked about this in years past. Mitzora is somebody who's afflicted with a skin condition. When I was in day school, we called it leprosy, but it really isn't. That's because I'll point out because generally the opinion is that it's not a contagious disease. It's not something that goes from one person to the next based on exposure, but rather it's a condition that comes about. It's a physical manifestation of a spiritual problem. Now, what that problem is widely discussed. The Gemara in Eruchin, Daf Tesayin talks about it. Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yossi Reb Zimra Kol Hamasaper Lashon Hara Negoim Ba'Malav. So Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Yossi Reb Zimra that anyone who speaks Lashon Hara, which is negative speech, speaking ill of other people, so they get this nega, this affliction of tsaras. There are others who attribute other causes to it. The Netziv talks about Chilul Hashem, about profaning the name of God, but as a practical matter, it's generally accepted that the major driving corruption, shall we say, that results in an individual being afflicted with tsaras is some kind of antisocial behavior, classically lashon hara, negative speech. So the Torah introduces this in Perek Yud Gimel Pasuk Beis Adam ki yiheh or b'soro, when a man shall have on his skin se'es or sapachas or baheres. The exact translations are somewhat elusive, but it's a swelling, a scab, a bright spot. And on the skin of his flesh, he has this affliction, nega, which is an affliction, tsaras, we're just going to call it tsaras. So, v'huva el Aharon Kohen o el echad mibanav Kohen. He's brought to the Kohen, now either to Aaron or to one of his children, meaning that this is a Kohanic function to investigate. So what does he do? So the next verse, that was 13:2, this is 13:3, says, V'ra'ah Kohen es hanega ba'or basar. The Kohen examines the nega, he looks at it, at this afflicted area. And then it says, if depending on its appearance, it's either cause for concern, in which case, but unresolved, so in which case he stays locked up basically in his house for 7 days and then the Kohen examines it again. If the conditions are that it's okay, it's resolved, or it hasn't gotten worse, then he's told, okay, you're tahor. But if it develops into one of the descriptions that the Torah says Tamei, so then he is declared to be Tamei. He is declared to be defiled, if you will. And the consequence of being defiled is not to be locked up in the house, but to be excluded from the machaneh, to be isolated outside of the encampment. Now, the Torah gives precise criteria about what the appearance of this affliction is, this physical affliction. And somebody has to be pretty learned in this matter to be able to distinguish between a scab or a boil or a swelling that is just garden variety or that which is tsaras. And the Torah describes it. But a person should be something of a scholar in order to be able to distinguish between something which is tamei and tahor. Fine. But it's not the scholar who declares the individual, the subject, to be tamei. It's the Kohen. He's brought to the Kohen, and the Kohen makes the declaration. The scholar may review it, look at it, advise the Kohen that this is something which is tamei, and the Kohen should declare it to be tamei. That is acceptable. But if the scholar says, if the Chacham says, this is Tamei, it has no effect. In other words, it's only on the basis of the declaration of a Kohen that he is declared to be Tamei. So the obvious question is why? I mean, if it's a problem that has defined characteristics, if it's a condition that has defined characteristics, so if you meet those criteria, so then you're in box number 1, Tamei. If you don't meet those criteria, you're in box number 2, which is tahor. So why does it require a declaration of specifically a Kohen? So Rashi does not ask this question, but he comments and he says, when it says that he's brought to the Kohen, so Rashi comments and he says, I'm not giving you a rationale of why it's a Kohen, why it has to be Kohen and not the scholar who did the assessment in the first place. He says, Gezeras HaKosovi. It is a declaration of the Torah. Gezeras HaKosov literally means it is a decree of the scripture. In other words, it is what it is. We don't question it. We accept it. That's fine. Gezeras HaKosov hi she'ein tumas negoim v'taharasan LLP Kohen. Both getting into the state of Tuma and coming out of it into a state of Tara all depends on the declaration of a Kohen. So Rashi says, Gzeres HaKosov means, as we described, but it's a decree of the scripture, meaning that's the way God said it has to be. We don't question why. Along comes, there are several who talk about it, notably in our day, the Lubavitch Rabbi commented and he said, why must it be that way? So he says, Kohen has a special function, and it's reflected in the bracha that he says when the Kohen gives the brachas kohanim, when the Kohen gives the priestly blessing. Besides giving the blessing itself, he says a brachas mitzvah. He says an orienting blessing. Before he gives a blessing to the Jews, he blesses God on the mitzvah. It's called the brachas mitzvah. And what's the language? What's the formula of the brachas mitzvah? Baruch Hashem, just like every other. Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, sheked Hashem mitzvah, blessed are you, God, King, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments, and commanded us. Now, if it was Hanukkah, we would say lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah, to light the candles of Hanukkah. But the bracha for the Kohen, before he gives the priestly blessing to the congregation, is v'tzivanu levarech es amo Yisrael be'ahava, who has commanded us to bless the children of Israel, or his people Israel, with love. The role of a Kohen is to love people, is to love God's children. That's his defining characteristic. And goes so far, the Shulchan Aruch goes so far as to say that if a Kohen gets up to give the priestly blessing in the middle of the davening, and he doesn't love one of the people in the congregation so much, as a matter of fact, he has animus towards him, he can't give the bracha. Why? Because it depends on love. In other words, love is a special thing for Kohanim. And they are the ones who are the teachers, they're spiritual leaders. Now, there are others, they're scholars as well. But the inherent obligation of the Kohen is to be a lover, of fellow Jews, of fellow human beings. Chazal say, Hevei mi talmidav shel Aaron Kohen. We should be like students of Aaron the priest. Ohev shalom v'odev shalom, loving peace, pursuing peace. Ohev es habrios, loving all of God's creations, meaning people, umakarvos on the Torah, and bring them close to the Torah. So, what is it about the Kohen and love that makes him uniquely qualified, as a matter of fact, exclusively qualified to make this declaration? And the Lubavitch Rebbe says that casting someone out of the community is an awful thing. And if someone is administering that consequence, then he can only do it if he loves everyone. If he loves a person to whom he's doing it, if he's angry at that person, it doesn't work. And so it's jarring to be excluded. It's awful to be excluded. And one might think it's not only the love that is required in order to make sure that the right thing is done. Rabbi comments parenthetically that the Kohen is likely to push the Chacham, the scholar, to make sure that he is actually confident that what he saw, if he's declaring him to be Tamei, that what he saw is actually the case. In other words, he's going to be an advocate for this Jew who is the subject of this examination. You might also assume that because of who he is as God's representative and as a lover of Jews, that he's going to find the right words. He's going to struggle to find the right words to encourage the person who is inflicted with tzara'as, to improve his ways, to get back on the right path, to conduct himself in such a manner that this won't happen again, and to cushion the blow of isolation to the extent appropriate. Sometimes the blow is necessary in order to shake a person up, but the Kohen can be counted upon to package this, what is in essence a rejection or an ejection. He's being ejected from the camp, and he has to sit by himself for the period until his tahara is achieved, which is 7 days or maybe even longer, depending on the situation. The Kohen will devote himself not just to the legal or legalistic criteria of determining who is a mitzvah and who is not, but also to the emotional need of the individual to make sure that he's being pointed in the right direction. And this ends up being a positive, might even say therapeutic, isolation for the individual. And Lubavitch Rebbe extrapolates to any individual who has to administer some kind of harsh treatment or punishment, that he first has to check himself to make sure that he has Ahavas Yisrael, he has this love for a fellow Jew in his heart, so that when the time comes that he actually does have to administer this difficult pill to swallow, if you will, that he does it only mitoch ava, only out of love, and not out of any ulterior motives other than wanting to do the will of God and wanting to do what's best for this person. We are in Sphira, and during Sphira, we pay special attention to the various midos, to the various attributes that are necessary in order to achieve a closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and certainly love of our fellow human being and our fellow Jew is right up there at the top, so much so that if we conduct ourselves in this way, we have a decent chance of witnessing the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash in our time. Have a good Shabbos.